The chance to shape your future is here. Learn and connect with exciting new opportunities. Are you ready for the next step?
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody who's joining us for today's event. Welcome to the one of the final sessions in the three-day event that has been the Emerging Tech Fest. Thank you for those of you who've joined us this afternoon. It's a rather wet afternoon in South Wales for me, but I hope the weather's slightly better wherever you are. And if you're watching the recording of this event, then who knows? There's no guessing what the weather's like with you. So thank you again for joining. This is a session relating to healthcare, health technology, and unlocking healthcare through technology. We've got some excellent speakers that I will introduce in person in a moment, who will be providing presentations on their specific topic areas. But I'd just like to say right from the start that having spoken to Jess, Michael, and Phil prior to today's event, they're all people who have a wealth of knowledge and experience outside of their specific presentation topic. So this would be a marvelous opportunity to ask questions, to raise topics, and to join in today's discussion. And I'm going to get the speakers to introduce themselves in a moment, so that you can put them on the spot in their specialist areas. So just to start, my name's Gwyn Tudor. I'm the Chief Executive of MediWales. MediWales is the life science network for Wales. We're a membership organisation. We have about 180 members. The majority of those members are companies, manufacturers who are involved in medical technology, diagnostics, pharmaceuticals and biotech in Wales. But our membership also includes the universities, the NHS and government support agencies. So it's a mixed bag and a lively network. And we feel like we've had a particular role to fulfill this year as a result of the lockdown and the COVID pandemic. Our sector has been in the spotlight for obvious reasons. The products that our companies, our manufacturers produce have been particularly in demand. The need to source locally, the need to source from UK manufacturers, both expertise and products, is particularly important at the moment. And the opportunity to network, to talk to people, to attend events has been particularly limited. So events like today, the Emerging Tech Fest, and events that we've been holding ourselves have been particularly important because we really have had the challenge of bringing together companies, academics, business, clinical experts, suppliers and buyers in our market in new ways. In some ways, these new platforms have been great because it means that people can attend at the drop of a hat and don't have to travel. So I think we're going to take away some things from this year that are going to stick in terms of opportunities to network and engage. But in other ways, I know we're all very keen to get back to start attending real events, real conferences, and real partnering opportunities across the globe. So hopefully. We'll carry on with the good things from the digital conferences, but we'll move on and mix that with a bit of live events in due course. So that's me, that's my organisation. And now I'm going to just go around the room in no particular order, but the order that everybody's presented on my screen, to just introduce yourself and tell us what your organisation does. So Jess, Lancashire. Jess, would you like to say hello?
Thanks, Gwyn. Hi, everybody. Delighted to be here with you today. My name's Jess Lancashire. I've worked in or with the NHS for the last 20 years or so. Had spent the last 10 years of that developing and selling solutions into the NHS, firstly for Optum, one of the large American health insurers, and then as a director at GE Healthcare. And for the last couple of years, I've been at Venbridge, where I'm focusing on the delivery of innovation within health and care systems. And I've been working with Cardiff and Vale University Health Board for the last 12 months on some really interesting projects around there. So delighted to be here today with you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Jess. And when we spoke earlier on in the week, and I had a look at your profile, I thought we've not met prior to today, but I just felt like we've probably been moving in very similar circles for a number of years. So I'm quite surprised we've not met. And you're very welcome here today, and bringing an NHS and an industry perspective to the discussion. So that's great. So next along on my screen is you, Michael. Michael Graz, who I have known for a number of years. But so, Michael, would you like to introduce yourself to the room?
Yeah, I'm Michael. I'm, I suppose, a frustrated scientist who has 2 PhDs. Don't ask me why 2, but yeah. I have spent the last 15 years in general management, specifically in the life sciences in South Wales, which is why I know Gwyn and Phil really well, having moved from pharmaceuticals into medical devices and back. And I will be talking on my latest venture, which is the use of breath analysis as a diagnostic.
And I'm not going to steal your thunder by going into that in any detail, Michael, but it does look like a really exciting project, and I'm very keen to hear your presentation. So last but not least, Phil, have you got 2 PhDs, Phil?
No. I'm Phil, I'm a commercial director at Bond. I started my career as a geologist, a degree in geology, worked on oil rigs, didn't like it, and ended up in pharmaceuticals for 25 years, management, and then latterly government affairs. And then started with Bond about 4 years ago. I'm a director at Bond, and I've actually got part of the company, so I'm very, very involved. And we do digital connectivity for diagnostics. So we do apps, we put the data into the cloud, and then we share the data on a dashboard. We've been doing this for 4 years. We do it for animal health, environmental, and human. And COVID, we've been saying that it's been really potentially useful for flu and infectious diseases, and then bang, COVID happened. So we've been very much in demand for the past 12 months and very busy.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Phil. And again, Phil is somebody who's been very active in our sector for a number of years. He's always a great person to either ask for an introduction or ask for advice, because he knows everybody, and he's got some great contacts. And I know, Phil, from your profile that you are now the chair of Digital Working Group for the British In Vitro Diagnostics Association.
I am indeed, yeah.
Congratulations on that.
Yeah, very exciting.
Great. So before we start, and it will be Phil to kick off with our presentations, I just want to talk to the room a little, to say that we have a chat function. And it would be great if you could engage with it and get involved. If you put questions in the I have a question section, then we have Natasha from KTN, who's going to be managing the Q&As for us. So please do ask any questions that you have. Otherwise, if it's just comments, introductions, if you want to stick your company's web address in the chat, then don't feel embarrassed, just do it. As much networking as possible would be great. And I'm going to pose a question to the chat room, and I'll ask the speakers when they finish their presentations. But essentially, my question to the room is going to be, if you knew a year ago what you know now, what would you have done differently on a business setting? Now, I know there's lots of things you might have done personally. I mean, I would have I definitely would have decorated my home office so that I wouldn't have to keep using a virtual background. But I really do mean on a business setting. What would you have done differently? How would you have planned for this length of lockdown? So that's a question to the room, and to everybody watching in the Q&A. But I'm going to step back now, and I'm going to hand over to Phil Groom. And Phil, I assume your presentation is ready and raring to go.
Michael is starting.
Good start, Gwyn. Michael, would you like to?
I will indeed. Give me 1 second and I will share my screen and start my presentation. That, share, present. There we go. And the reason I'm going first is because Phil and I are doing a bit of a double act, where I'm starting on the collection of the data, and then Phil is going to explain on the basis of what he said earlier on how that data can be used and presented. So really, what I'm looking at the moment is a point of care test, which is very particular to using a single breath, because it is very much deemed the future of diagnostics. And if you would believe the future think gurus from Google, they think that in the future you should be able to step up to your bathroom mirror, blow into it, and it will tell you whether or not you have a disease, are healthy, or need an extra vitamin. And Google actually have a company called Verily that is looking specifically into breath analysis. So this is very much a potential for the future of diagnostics. So why breath? So I think the big thing about breath is, you breathe into a tube. It's non-invasive. You don't have to have someone push a stick into your throat or up your nose. No one's going to take a drop of blood from you. It is literally, you're going to blow into a tube. And for those of you that have had the unpleasant experience of having to blow into a DUI tube, it's exactly the same process. Now, breath is considered inexhaustible. Now, I appreciate that for people on a ventilator, that might not be such, but I mean, for the average man in the street, it very much is. And breath represents your metabolism. I'll, set you all a simple challenge: eat some garlic tonight, and by tomorrow morning, the people around you would probably notice that you have metabolized sulfur. Because it will be on your breath. The great thing about breath is it allows you to monitor the entire body, because it is really a representation of your physiology. It is representative. It's been shown to be able to diagnose and give reflections of things like cancer, IBD, upper respiratory tract infections, and even mineral deficiencies. Sampling is easy. You can give a breath sample anywhere. It doesn't require a man in a white coat who has to then take it off to a laboratory and analyze it. And last but not least, it's really accessible, from a cultural perspective, where there are issues with respect to having to give a breath sample, or having to give a sample that is maybe invasive to the body, like blood, or even a nasal swab. So what about ImSpec's medical? Why are we interested in this? Well, we've been developing the technology really for the last 4 years. We have shown that it is, non-invasive, it's functional. We have had the largest global clinical trial with breath analysis, having deployed equipment across various settings. We have shown that it is as accurate as the gold standard for things like COVID, but just as much for detecting a group B streptococcus infection. It allows analysis at point of care, and I think that's really important, or point of testing if it's not a healthcare environment. It's fast, it's accurate. Our current COVID test takes about 10 minutes from a single breath, and it can be scaled. The great thing is, especially for a pandemic situation like this one, it can be used for triaging, and we're hoping that it can be used in the future to allow you to enter the Millennium Stadium again, or climb onto a plane. ImSpec it's not a new technology. We have over 300 devices in the market already in various configurations. we are not pre-revenue, and actually we already have orders for 110 of breath spec units, and we're only in the 3rd week of January. This is what the unit looks like. I appreciate it's not the most beautiful device, but it does come from an analytical background. But it is as simple as that. Really what you need to take a sample is a tube and a syringe, a person who's going to blow into a tube, and someone who does not have to be a trained research scientist who can inject that sample into the device. And I'm going to show you in an 11-second video exactly how simple this is. So you blow into the tube, you want a deep breath, a long breath, it is then injected into the machine, and you push a button, and 8 minutes later, you will have a response. It is really as simple as that. Yep. Now, how do I bypass that? It has been deployed in various different situations in primary and secondary healthcare. It's currently in Sri Lanka. And as you can see on the right-hand side of my slide, it can be handled by someone who is very, very well PPE'd up. And we've even tested this in simulated disaster situations. The device is mobile, it can be plugged in anywhere rapidly. It does not require a long time to start itself up, and which makes it very useful for mobile applications or community settings. So obviously I have to talk about the science. It's really simple. It is a GC that is linked to an ion mobility spectrometer. It gives you a 2-dimensional spectrogram, and it's that 2-dimensional spectrogram that is used with pattern recognition to determine whether or not you have a specific disease. It's very sensitive. It detects in the parts per billion range, and it's used in a lot of applications, not just medical. What we've been doing is perfecting it for a medical application. And quite specifically, it detects volatiles. Provided there is a volatile present, we will pick it up. What it gives you, really simple, is a 2-dimensional, or should I say 3-dimensional image. And by detecting the various peaks that come out from the device, we are able then to make a very rapid decision on whether or not you have something like COVID. We were very fortunate that together with Loughborough University, to whom I have to say thank you to allow me to use their slides, we had a very significant study both in Edinburgh and in Germany, looking quite specific at using this technology for COVID. And what we found was that the upper plot is from Edinburgh, the lower plot is from Germany, that 2 completely independent centers found effectively the same spectrogram, and with a very small cohort in the summer, which was great for the population, but a very small cohort of 90 patients does not lead to the development of a diagnostic device. The sad thing for the population is that the increase, the very sad spikes in COVID infection at the moment. However, that has meant that we have been able to improve our test. And let me not jinx this, so touch wood, by June, we should be CE marked and able to sell this as a diagnostic. We foresee a future where breath analysis will be available in most primary and secondary healthcare and healthcare units. And quite frankly, if we go with Google, then hopefully one day breath analysis will be in the home. And in the short term, obviously, there's this opportunity to deploy the technology in the healthcare and community. And it's really what is necessary at this stage, and which is where I'm going to hand over to Phil in a moment, is the result is one thing. How you can actually show the world that you've been tested and what you can do next, I think that's going to be where Phil steps in. And if you want to contact me, my details, but I'm quite sure you can get hold of me either on LinkedIn or via the organizers. Phil, over to you.
Great. If you unshare, I will share.
I hope I've unshared.
Excellent. So Thanks, Michael. So this is, as Michael said and Gwyn said right at the beginning, Michael and I have known each other for a number of years, and he's been aware of our technology and what we do, and it just seemed like the obvious partnership. Bond, we take the kind of strapline for what we're doing is take an informed action. We need to reopen communities, the economy, and ultimately save lives. So what we do as a company is, as Michael's alluded to, their equipment produces a readout. And this is where we come in. Basically, we get the information from directly from the equipment that you saw on the desk. And traditionally what we do is we've been working with lateral flow diagnostics. So in this example that you can see on the screen, we record a test from a lateral flow test, like the antigen and antibody test you're seeing a lot of at the moment. We squirt the data into the cloud and then we share it on a dashboard. So this helps better with data is basically the strapline that we're kind of ensuring everybody understands. If we'd had, Gwyn said at the beginning, what would you have done differently? We would have liked to have had more data. If every single test that had been currently done, whether it's PCR or lateral flow or antibody or antigen, if every test had been recorded and mapped so far, we would have a handle on this. We would know where the hotspots are, where the problems are. We would be able to relate that to epidemiological data and know what communities and what people are more at risk. So this is the whole point of coupling cutting edge technology like BreathSpec with data capture that we have. So software company, but the difference with us is we just do diagnostics and we do what we've referred to as scientific grade software. Anybody can do an app, a cloud or a dashboard, but it has to be regulated. And our software takes at least twice as long as anybody else's to do because it has to be approved by 510K for FDA, CE mark, 13485, all those sort of regulatory markers. So we are backed by significant investment over the past 18 months. The Welsh Government have invested in us and we've had private equity investment of over 2 million. So we're actually using this money to accelerate rapidly what we were planning to do anyway. And the benefits, like I said, scientific grade software, which enables better use of data. It's fast, secure and scalable. We can go from somebody like Michael doing 10 tests a day to 10 million tests a day, and we can scale very, very quickly. We present the data in a very easy to understand format. I'll show you some examples of dashboards in a minute. We do Android and iOS apps to wirelessly or directly capture the data from the unit. And we can then incorporate on the screen instructions for use and collect symptom data or epidemiological data to build a bigger picture. The app, as I said, transfers data to the cloud. We then present that in a dashboard, and because it's captured using usually a mobile phone, the results can be geo-mapped, shared in real time, and pinpointed to within fractions of a meter. And then onward connectivity from our database. So, for instance, we're talking to organisations involved with the CDC and Public Health England, so that we can then squirt this data back out and pass it on to them. And then ultimately, the things that have really developed in the past couple of months is people want an output from this test. It's great that you've got a positive or a negative, hopefully a negative, but what do you do with that? Do you get a printed out piece of paper? Do you get a certificate? Who's validating that certificate? And currently, I could go online today and buy a fake vaccine certificate or a fake PCR negative certificate that would get me on a plane. We're trying to put something in place with companies backed by the Rockefeller Center that should combat that. So here's BreathSpec, as Michael's shown you in the video. we will collect the data directly from the BreathSpec machine and send it directly to a dashboard. And you can see here 2 examples. This is one actually from a lateral flow test, and it'll give you a positive, a negative, and an inconclusive. You might be able to pick up on that screen that it also says it's collecting age, sex, underlying conditions and symptoms. All this information is very, very useful. The data is so useful and valuable for informing and planning. So informing public health, helping people deploy resources such as PPE tests and vaccines. And you can take it one step further and you can actually start plotting hotspots. So you can see areas where it's under control for whatever reason, whether that's environmental or policy. You can see areas where it's out of control, and then governments can make decisions and say, right, let's direct resources to these hotspots. And ultimately what we want to do is then generate, this is a fairly new thing, a fit to fly or a fit to work pass. The pass that you're seeing on the left is one that we're developing, but the pass that you're seeing on the right is one by an organization called the Common Project, and this is the Common Pass. I think it's currently being tested at Heathrow and other places around the world, and we think that this may well be the one that internationally will be recognized. So you will be able to have a test, whether that whatever diagnostic that is, but hopefully in an airport very, very quickly with BreathSpec. You will come up as negative. That will instantly squirt via your email a QR coded pass to your phone, and then you can proceed through the process like you do at the airport at the moment and get on the plane. If you come up positive, then you'll be triaged either for a PCR test and told to isolate. So how it all fits, in a nutshell, Michael's magical equipment will very quickly tell you if you're positive or negative. That will then go to a dashboard that could be shared instantly all around the world with World Health Organization, local public health, CDC, and a pass system will be generated straight to your phone so you can go back to work or travel. These are some of the companies we're working with currently: Sona Nanotech in Canada, Dylanox, who are Qiagen, Abingdon Health, ChemBio, and MoLogic, and they're just ones that we can tell you about because they're okay with that. And that's pretty much it from me. If you've got any questions, if you want to contact me, LinkedIn's probably the easiest. So thank you, and back to Gwyn.
So if you can cancel your slides, Phil.
Yep. I just like sharing my data a little bit longer there so people can get my right. Thank you.
Good point. Well, put your email in the chat, Phil, and then people can pick up on that if they need to. Otherwise, they can contact us or you or Google you, and I'm sure you're fairly easy to get in contact with. So my immediate question for you, Phil, and for Michael is probably one that I'm going to pose now, but then I'm going to pause and maybe we can discuss it after Jess's presentation, because I think she might have some input into it. And that is that it is just such I mean, it's amazing technology, amazing solution, so simple, but just I can just imagine how difficult it would be to get public sector rapid adoption for the technology and the service in the UK. And as I know, Jess is quite good at healthcare sector adoption of new technology, I'm going to leave that question until Jess has finished and hand over to you. So, Jess.
Great. Thanks so much, Gwyn. Two fantastic products to hear about there. What I want to talk to you about is actually unlocking the NHS and getting products into the NHS. I'm going to talk about why the NHS is attractive as a market, why it's difficult, and why innovation is particularly difficult in the NHS. I'm going to talk about Wales and the many fantastic reasons why Wales is a really interesting place to be at the minute. I'm then also going to do a bit of a compare and contrast of procurement routes and grant funding routes to working with the NHS, and then just some thoughts on what you can do to be successful, which may give you a couple of things to think about. So let's start with unlocking the NHS. So why is the NHS attractive to us? Well, I guess to start off with, we know that there are lots of problems that can be solved in the NHS. There are lots of ways in which your products and ideas and solutions can have a positive impact on people. I think also it's a really large market that feels easy to quantify. So because it has a fairly sophisticated pricing mechanism within the NHS, it's quite easy to identify where you could have potentially an impact and then price out from that to scale your likely market. It's also a good brand to be associated with. So to be working within the NHS, I think remains a marker of a high quality, good value product. And I think for many of us, there's a values-based driver, is that actually working with the NHS is where we make a difference to the communities that we're living in. So those are some of the reasons why we want to be working with the NHS. And as I say, it can feel quite straightforward when you stand back from the NHS. It's quite easy. Here, the King's Fund have mapped out really simply how the money flows from the Treasury down to individual providers. And so it can sort of appear at the outside that it should be a fairly navigable system to engage with. But I think many of us will have experienced the challenge of that actually when it comes to tackling some big challenges. So this is a diagram on the left, again from the King's Fund, around the transformation of care. Just the plethora of organisations that are involved in trying to deliver a system response can make it very challenging, and that actually trying to access the market can feel far more like this assault course or obstacle course on the right than we might have anticipated. So I think it's not unusual to find that the NHS is difficult, and I think that the number of the key things that jump out to me around what makes it so difficult is certainly that fragmentation of organisations. And I think one of the hardest things is, who is it that is actually going to be your purchaser? Who is it that's going to buy the product from you? And within the NHS, you need, for anybody to make that decision, you need the decision maker, the influencer, and the budget holder to be aligned on what they want to do. And often in the NHS, those can be 3 different people sitting in 3 different organisations, and that can be very hard to bring together. I think the 1-year budgeting cycles also are a real challenge. So in order to make the decision that you want to be doing something fundamentally different, and then you have to be seeing the impact of that within 12 months is quite a tall ask from innovative solutions. I think in some places there's over-regulation. So I'm sure there are some of you that have experienced significant hoops to jump through, red tape to battle your way through to get your product to the market. In other areas, there's a lack of a consistent market standard. So actually you're taking something to somebody that they don't know what are the right questions to ask to ensure that they're getting a quality product. And so if you're finding it hard, I guess I would say you're not alone, and it's not unusual. It is a difficult market to access. And I think there are some reasons why innovation is particularly difficult. So I'm sure you've heard the metric that it takes 17 years for an innovation to be adopted across the NHS. And that sort of gets thrown around as evidence that it is very, very difficult. And I saw this lovely slide from Lab last week, who were running a session for the Cardiff City deal. And I thought this illustrated really beautifully why it is so difficult to get innovative solutions into the NHS. And this is Bill Sharp's model of 3 horizons of thinking, and they're always taking place all at the same time, so they're not discrete. But the first horizon is the zone of managing and sustaining. The second is the zone of experimentation, and the third is the green one, which is the zone of aspiration. And I'm sure that for many of us in this discussion today, where we would naturally go to are the zone of experimentation and the zone of aspiration. We're in those entrepreneurial and those innovative zones. And I think the reality is that actually the NHS is very much embedded in the first zone. It's that zone of managing and sustaining. And so when we're taking innovative solutions, we're talking to them about something which is not where their energy and their resources are actually invested. So I think that's something you need to think about as you're shaping and structuring the story that you want to tell about your innovation. But opportunities in Wales. I think Wales is a great place to be at the minute. I've been working here for about 12 months or so, and there's been some really exciting work that we've been able to do in that time. It's an ambitious small system, and I would say that that ambition starts at the top from Welsh Government, flows down to the leadership of health boards and down to individual clinicians. And there's a really compelling drive to establish Wales as one of the best small health and care systems in the world, and there's absolutely no reason why they can't achieve that. They've got a fantastic foundation in terms of innovative policy, in terms of the Future Generations Act, which actually creates a statutory requirement for organisations to lift themselves up out of the first zone and start looking into the second and third. The health board structures are also hugely helpful. So they are already bringing together for you primary, secondary, tertiary, community and mental health care all into one organisation. It also provides a competitive economic base. So Michael was sharing with me that he was looking at where to put some labs and had undertaken an international review. And between Wales, Germany and Malaysia, Wales actually came out with a really, really strong economic case for putting the labs there. And I think there's a really fantastic ecosystem and clusters that are emerging in Wales. You've got the Life Science Hub, you've got MediWales, you've got the Maltings. These are all really, really well set up to enable you to succeed. And the levels of investment coming into Wales are extremely exciting and I think are only going to increase. And I'm told, I've not experienced it myself, it's a great place to live. And I think that is, that's a real driver for thinking about how we develop and attract and then retain talent that will be needed to continue to drive innovation. So let's talk about procurement and grant funding in a little bit more detail. So these are two different ways that you can get paid to work with the NHS. And I think what we want to look for is less of what is on the left, these sort of flaming hoops that we're required to jump through, and more of the collaborative partnership-based working that is really building success for everybody that's involved in it. So procurement is the action of obtaining or procuring something. And NHS organisations are constrained by EU procurement law, which requires them to undertake processes that will ensure that they are securing value for money for the taxpayer. And there's a huge associated industry that goes around this. So all public sector organisations have to publish their tenders through ODU, which means it's very easy for organisations like Tenders Direct to then pull those out for you and tell you and share with you the opportunities that you might be interested in. It's a pretty objective process. So the organisation has to identify a budget, they have to identify what it is they want to buy from you in terms of output or outcomes, and then they have to set the metrics that they will use to compare the different results that they get from people. So it's very easy to structure your response and actually score yourself against their scoring criteria to make sure that you've really done the best that you can with your submission. I think there are some real challenges around it though. So it's not the most nuanced process often, and the procurement law creates some particular constraints around what you can and can't do through the process. It can also be really frustrating if you come up against poorly framed specifications. So if they're just asking the wrong question, or they're not clear on what it is that they actually want. And I've also experienced cases where we've invested a huge amount of time and effort and then find ourselves in front of assessment panels that clearly haven't even read the response that we've given. So that can feel frustrating as well. And at the end of the process, what you get into is a contractual relationship. So you are providing X, Y, and Z, and they are paying you this amount for it. So it's a fairly transactional process, which leads to a transactional relationship in many senses. There are growing opportunities around partnership working, but I think when you scratch underneath the surface of many of those, actually it does still come down to a transactional contractual relationship with some shared risk sharing within that. The other option is looking to secure grant funding. So funding is where money is provided by an organisation or a government for a particular purpose. And in these instances, organisations are often looking for ideas, solutions, opportunities that will drive economic growth, solve big societal challenges and fix market failure. One of the things that's really attractive around funding is that it often provides money and support. So the incentives are really aligned for you to be successful, because if you are successful, then the funder will have delivered against their objectives, which means they are successful. The money also, and the involvement with the funder, also acts as a honeypot. So in order to solve big societal problems, we often need to bring partnerships together to do that. And that's much easier to do when people have an incentive, i.e. some money, to encourage them to operate outside of their organisational boundaries. I'd also say it's a much more subjective process. And some people might find this more frustrating than the procurement process. I guess each one has its pros and cons. But I would say that funders are open to building relationships. So they want to understand and they want to be in conversation with the people that can help them to deliver against their objectives and continue to evolve their funding opportunities. I think the main gap at the moment around grant funding is the adoption element. So I think the funding that is available enables innovative ideas to get to a stage, but there is still then a significant distance to travel until that solution is ready to engage in a straightforward procurement process with the NHS. But I think that we will start to see that grant funding will start to ring fence money for adoption funding. So we will go through the straight, for example, an SBRI process, go through the standard two-phase process that we're familiar with, and then have a third process which provides funding for adoption activities, which I think would be a real game changer and help to narrow that gap between funding and procurement. So those are some thoughts on the differences between the two. So what can you do to succeed? Well, I think the first thing is make sure that the NHS is a market you want to get into. It is tricky. I worked for Optum for about 5 years, and I think they were in the UK for over a decade before they started to make a profit. So it is a significant challenge to get into the NHS. So I would be really clear that it is what you want to be doing. I'd be clear on the problem that you're actually able to solve and who it is that is going to buy that from you. Then think about identifying partnerships that will enable you to be a bigger solution. So how can you solve more of a problem for people? And those partnerships will then also give you a broader network. Focus on people, not organisations. So however, although the NHS is a very large and complicated organisation, selling is still done on a person-by-person basis. So think carefully about where you have influence, who it is you want to build relationships with, rather than starting with a list of organisations. Grant funding can provide a fantastic opportunity to build partnerships. You might see a funding opportunity and think about which NHS organisations you might want to involve as partners in that. And that's a great way to start working with the NHS. I think you can also test and build partnership with low-cost offers. So most organisations, if something costs £5,000 or less, will be able to do it as a direct award. So they won't need to go through a procurement process. If it's less than 25,000, they'll need to demonstrate some sort of economic evaluation, usually a process of getting 3 quotes for something. So think about what it is that you could do and get paid for that would enable you to start building those relationships and building the evidence that you need. I'd say get help. You have accountants. You don't expect yourself to be a brilliant accountant as well as a brilliant innovator. So get people in that can help you to identify your strategy for getting into the NHS and start crafting your story and developing that narrative for you. I would say follow the energy. If it feels like you're flogging a dead horse, then you probably are, and I would move on to the next thing. And finally, just have a really clear gateway or decision points that ensure you're focusing your resources on the right things as you go. Because I think one of the biggest challenges for small organisations is whether they are investing their time and energy in the right things to build a successful business. So hopefully some of that is helpful. I don't have a contact sheet as my last screen, so I will just pop my details in the chat box. But hopefully there's been some useful stuff there, and it will be great to hear from you.
Thank you very much, Jess, and huge amount of comments and thoughts that that your presentation have made me think about. I mean, I totally agree with you on everything you said. There's a very high level of ambition and an intent at the senior levels in the NHS in Wales. There is a genuine desire to work in new innovation and new products, but for a number of reasons, there is still that gap between innovation, research and development, and adoption. Some of them we would definitely want to stay. I mean, a couple of the reasons why it takes so long to get products into the NHS is that you know, we'd understand as patients and as family members being patients that we want products to be safe. And we want products to work. So companies do have to spend a lot of time providing that evidence. And then as taxpayers, we want to make sure that companies are getting or make sure that the NHS is getting a good deal and that companies are charging a fair price. So some of those delays and barriers that are about procurement are obviously there for good reason. So we do find that there's a lot of intent and there's a lot of good processes in place and barriers for the right reason, but there still seems to be a challenging gap between especially new technology, new science, new innovation, and procurement and adoption, and specifically adoption at scale. And you've thrown in a few things there, like the idea that funding can help bridge that gap, and maybe SBRI is a bit of a hybrid, isn't it? Because that's a combination between a contract and funding. But can I just press you on that as a question? Can I just press you on that gap between working with the NHS in an R&D capacity and maybe doing product trials with them, and then trying to sell to them afterwards? Have you cracked that one?
No. I think one of the biggest challenges for the NHS, when you're engaging with the NHS, is one of the biggest barriers is it wasn't built here. Challenges that you can come across. So I think it can be astonishing sometimes that you can undertake work to build evidence with one organisation and then go to another organisation and say, here you go, we've got an evidence base, and they can say, well, we're terribly different. You know, our population is very different, or our clinical model is very different, and there are many reasons why we need to go back to the drawing board and start again with you. So I think some of that can be a real challenge. I think in terms of, you know, I think procurement works well for developed products where you've got the right questions to ask to have a fair process around it. And I think the gap is how do you move from that? How do you create those marketplaces where it is easier for the NHS to be confident that they are asking the right questions of products before they have necessarily become you know, earlier on in that process of development? And I think that is the biggest gap. It feels as if it's hard for people who may have brilliant products but are very small to start participating in the processes that they need to in order to really start to scale up across the NHS. So I think that the development of the approach around funding is a really, really important part of that. I think the development in thinking amongst senior leadership in the NHS is really, really important, because I think also NHS organisations need to think about how they need to structure themselves more effectively to identify innovation that will help them to solve problems, and how they can support the development of that innovation, because ultimately it's in everybody's best interest that that innovation does get adopted.
Excellent, thank you. Michael, you're a glutton for punishment. Sorry, a serial entrepreneur. You've been through this pain barrier a number of times, and I think it'd be right to say, probably as a result of your 2 PhDs, that quite a lot of the stuff that you're doing is quite high-end science. It's quite new, it's quite technical. It's not the kind of thing, it's not a new spatula, and it's not a new walking stick. So you must hit that barrier quite often of convincing people in positions of decision making that that your product is the right thing to buy at the right price. So maybe with the ImSpecs project, but maybe more widely as well. Could you expand on that?
I can. I'm not going to forgive myself for commenting on my academic background because you're going to give me a hard time about it. But you know, I think what we have encountered over the years is a distinct willingness to engage with us. But as Jess has pointed out, you know, there are such hurdles to overcome that sometimes it is literally easier to target markets where those hurdles are, from a safety and efficacy and price perspective, probably very similar, yet you're not having to jump through a lot of the hoops that you do with the NHS, because once you've got your CE marking, you still need approval from one of the other agencies, whether it be NICE or someone else. And that doesn't guarantee that you're actually going to then be picked up by the various NHS trusts. Whereas, moving across the pond into the US, you can start negotiating with some of the sort of 5 big insurance companies, and if they're happy to consider reimbursement, then you have a much easier segue into that market. But because they cover, in any one of those insurance companies covers a very large span. So it is very much what Jess said, is you pick the battles that you can win, and especially as a small organization, when your resources are limited, you tackle the markets where you believe that limited resource allows you to access them. And I think with all of the different hats that I've worn, that has been our experience. But I have to be really fair. I mean, the people that we have engaged with the NHS, on a personal level, when you have a technology that really makes sense and where they can see the benefit, the reason that you don't end up being able to sell to the NHS sometimes has nothing to do with those individuals. It is because, as Jess points out, you're having to deal with three different people across 3 different organizations who are managing a P&L that it gets reviewed every year, rather than taking a larger health economic public health view, which as individual trusts they can't do.
Okay, that's great. That's a good answer, and reflects how chairing a session that John Wilkinson, who was formerly the chief executive of the ABHI and then went on to be head of medical devices at MHRA, so not the rugby player, but the medical device expert, was asked at a conference what was his top tip for a small, young, innovative medical device company to start selling products and commercialize. And his top tip was to locate the company near a good regional airport. Which essentially was a creative way of saying the same thing that you've just said, Michael, that possibly the international markets, while you're working on selling into the NHS, and while you're working in R&D with the NHS, possibly looking at your international markets as a more of an early adoption model is something that you really should consider. Phil, digital adds another layer on top of this. You're not even talking about a device and a thing. You're talking about bits and bytes and software as a service. So where are the challenges, and how do you overcome them? And how do you look to overcome them with this current project?
I'll give you 2 answers. First of all, with technology, having sold to the NHS for 25 years in pharma, I think what Michael said about choosing your battles, pharma are big enough to battle. Smaller companies just haven't got the resource. Therefore, I've had to flip the other way and now say, I don't try to sell to the NHS, which I hate. It's awful, but we haven't got the resource to battle all the time. The data side of things, similarly, there's so much risk aversion that it's very, very difficult to integrate with systems. So again, we keep our product enclosed, and then we produce what we call an API, which is a handshake. So we can talk to anything, but we never build something to embed into an NHS system, because it is fraught with danger and trouble.
And well, we are told that I mean, there are some big changes on the way in digital in Wales, and the new chief digital officer and the dynamic procurement of digital services should have an impact on the way that Welsh NHS procures digital. But I think
I'd love to talk to him.
Yeah, well, I think we need a bit of time, maybe a few weeks for that to all to unravel and or to bed in, I should say, not unravel. So Jess, two quite blunt comments there in terms of digital adoption and new innovation and new technology adoption. So there's obviously a challenge, which is good news for you in a way. There is work to do, but do you want to come back on any of those?
No, I mean, I think we're sort of all in danger of agreeing with each other vociferously, aren't we? I think the point is that if you're finding it difficult, that's not unusual. You know, it is a difficult process. And I think, you know, the key thing I would encourage people to do is to make sure they are well prepared. And I think it can often, I guess the thing I often come across is that people come and ask for help too late. So they've invested a huge amount of time and effort in things which are either just not focusing on the right thing, or they just haven't got their messaging right. So I would say ask for help sooner rather than later, because then you're, you know, the key thing when you're a small organisation is getting the most out of your resources. And I think that's the really key thing with the NHS.
So Michael and Phil, you've both experienced raising funds in this space to try and bridge this valley of death, and I imagine that Jess's comment there about asking for help early, I imagine can also, you could add to that, be realistic with your funders and your timescales, and in making sure your investors are fully aware of the time to market in our market. Would that be true, Michael?
Very much. I think the advice that the one thing that Jess said, you know, get advice early. After the first time that we didn't get anywhere, we did, you know, do exactly that and take advice early. And the advice to us is from, you know, especially for fundraising, was don't have the NHS in, you know, as a potential revenue generator in the first 5 years of your business plan. You know, and really, because people are going to look at that and say, well, you know, exactly what Jess said. You know, what path are you going to take to break into that into that market in order to be able to generate that revenue? So, you know, having given that advice, I think the one thing that people across the globe do really, you know, reflect very positively on is having worked with the NHS, even just on an R&D basis, really important, and I think gives you a lot of credibility. And the other thing is, if you do break into that market, that opens a lot of doors for you in other international markets. You know, but it does come down to, you need the resources in order to do that. So it does become a balancing act.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And Phil, would you add to that?
I just totally agree. It's all to do with resource. As a startup, you haven't got the money for consultancy. You haven't got the money and the time to go through that process. So you have to go business to business. It's, you know, it's just the way it is.
So you generate revenue early. And whether that's through international markets or through selling services. And I think, Jess, you mentioned finding what you could sell to the NHS now as a way of creating a relationship early. So it might not be your big plan and your multi-million-pound project that's going to buy your yacht. But if you can start engaging and having a relationship with the NHS sooner rather than later, then you're not coming out of the blue when you do want to talk to them about big projects. Phil?
Just one comment that I picked up with Jess, which was about one of the rate limiting factor is 1 year budgets. Now, I know some of the health boards in Wales tried to extend that, but when you're dealing with a budget that's 1 year at a time, if you bring forward a product that involves an upfront investment of say £250,000, but is going to pay £8 million worth of dividends in the next 2 years, you often still get a no. Now, if that was stretched wider and people were actually really genuinely told that it was wider and that, you know, you wouldn't get a big row at the end of the financial year, it would be after 3 years, maybe it would be more palatable for everybody.
And novel procurement models, and we could probably move on to value-based healthcare and value-based procurement. If we had more time, we have 1 minute left. So I'm not going to ask Jess to come back on those things in detail, because I know, Jess, you could probably do another 40 minutes on those topics. But I asked the question at the beginning. So I said, what would you do differently if you'd known that this situation was going to last a year? Jess?
I've been racking my brains about this. I mean, my initial response was go on holiday. But actually, I think we've been wonderfully busy, which has been a great thing. But I think the biggest challenge has been juggling work and family commitments, and actually be operating at a level which enables you to do that. I think has been the key to everybody staying sane this year.
Absolutely. Phil?
I would have taken meditation and mindfulness more seriously. So that I wasn't learning it halfway through.
and Michael?
I think I would have stocked up on more running shoes, because that meditation and mindfulness I get from running, and really that ability to be able to switch between home and office, which for me is a walk out of one door into the other, is a challenge. And I think really having thought about, or having been in a position to be able to find a way to really separate home from work is where, what I would really have liked to have been able to do.
So mostly about well-being and lifestyle and staying happy and staying healthy. And I wouldn't argue with that. During the first lockdown, I gained more weight than I ever have done, and during the second lockdown, I then had to lose it. So yes, I think staying healthy, staying happy, and getting the work-life balance right is something that we've all had to learn to do. I think we're out of time. One question did come in very late, which was what's the time to market through the NHS? I think we've discussed that in quite a lot of detail. Jess started with saying it could be 17 years, but I think that's from idea through to procurement, not necessarily from having a market-ready product through to procurement. So if any of you have a one-word answer for that, then please shout it out now. But I'm not sure we can. I'm sure we're all happy to give advice offline if someone has a specific product that they want to.
I will say I was in a virtual presentation in Bristol. I wasn't in Bristol. The virtual presentation was supposed to, or the presentation was supposed to be in Bristol, and the number of 7 years was mentioned.
Yeah. So Jess also mentioned relationships. The next time you'll see me is during the week of 29th of March to the 1st of April, when we are running our Medi Wales NHS Connects conference. Sadly, we're doing it digitally. It's a well-run conference with quite a long reputation for bringing together academic, business and clinical organisations in Wales. So I'm sure some of the topics we've discussed today are going to rattle on during that week of events, and I do hope that all of our speakers here will play a role in that in that event. It's been an absolute delight to spend an hour with such a room full of experts, 3 people who I think have all either launched a business or launched a product during COVID. So that's your book deal for your retirement in years to come, I think. I'm really grateful for your time, your expertise, your wisdom, and thank you so much for being so generous and sharing it. And I think we will close the session there. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining the Emerging Tech Fest. Join us again on our virtual live sessions, or watch us on playback anytime, anywhere.